The cold air bites at my lungs, not from the office air conditioning, but from the vacuum of silence that just fell. His face, usually flushed with confident success, is draining of color, going slackjaw white. Beside him, her eyes, moments ago gleaming with smug anticipation, widen into saucers of pure, unadulterated horror. The contract, the one he just slid across the polished desk, lies between us, an obscene testament to their secret world. It's signed, sealed, delivered. Or so they thought. My hand rests on a simple manila folder, unassuming, yet it holds the kill switch. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. We had built something beautiful, or what I believed was beautiful. Years melted into a comfortable rhythm. Mornings started with shared coffee and quiet plans. Evenings ended with the familiar weight of his arm around me on the couch. His business, a tech firm specializing in medical imaging software, was our shared dream, fueled by years of his relentless work and my unwavering belief. I handled the home front, the quiet infrastructure of our life, the logistical maze that allowed him to soar. I wasn't in the office every day, but I knew the heart of the operation. I knew the long nights he'd poured into developing the core technology. I knew the struggles, the near failures, the triumphs. It was more than just his work, it was a part of our lifeblood. We talked about expansion, about our future, about the legacy we were building. It felt solid, unbreakable. We were a team. The first crack was a hairline fracture, barely visible. He started staying late, too late even for him.
Stress, he said.
Big project. Then came the trips, always sudden, always urgent. Conferences, he explained, vital for networking. His phone became a second skin, notifications silenced, screen angled away from me. Little things, easily explained away by the pressures of running a successful company. I told myself I was being paranoid. He was just busy. He was providing for us. My role was to support, not to pry. But the feeling gnawed at me. A cold, damp sensation creeping into the corners of our warm house. The way he flinched when I touched his shoulder unexpectedly. The generic, rehearsed answers to simple questions about his day. The scent of a perfume that wasn't mine, lingering faintly on his shirt. I started piecing it together, not actively searching at first, but noticing. My eyes, once blind with trust, were suddenly seeing everything. It was a misplaced phone bill, shoved deep into a drawer. My name was on the account, but the call log, hundreds of calls, texts to a number I didn't recognize. Late at night, early in the morning, long conversations. My hands trembled as I cross-referenced the number. It belonged to one of the newer employees at his company. Marketing, I thought. Sarah. Young, ambitious, sharp. He'd mentioned her in passing. A good hire, he'd said. Talented. The discovery felt like a physical blow. The air left my lungs. The room spun. Betrayal. The oldest story. My mind reeled, cycling through months, years, replaying interactions, searching for signs I'd missed. The late nights, the trips, the phone. It all clicked into place with sickening precision. The pain was a hot, burning coal in my chest, spreading outwards, turning my blood to ice. But even then, I didn't suspect the true depth of the rot. I thought it was just her. A midlife crisis cliché. A temporary insanity. I grieved for the marriage, the trust, the future I thought we had. I prepared myself for the inevitable confrontation, the tears, the accusations, the messy end. But then I found the documents. Tucked away in his home office safe, mixed in with tax records and insurance papers. They weren't obvious. Drafts, legal jargon, references to corporate restructuring. My head swam trying to decipher them. It mentioned share transfers, asset reallocation, ownership percentages. It was dry, complex, terrifying. It didn't make sense. Why was he moving assets? Was the business in trouble? Was he protecting us? I started digging deeper, more deliberately this time. My fear for our marriage morphed into a cold dread about our financial security. I consulted a lawyer, a family friend, without revealing the full extent of my suspicions. I framed it as estate planning questions, a routine checkup on our corporate structure. His calm explanations only highlighted how abnormal my husband's actions were. The documents weren't standard practice. They were setting something up, something significant. The lawyer's questions were clinical, probing. Is there any intellectual property involved? Patents? Specific licensing agreements that are critical to the product? Yes, I told him. The core software, the one he'd spent years on, it had a patent. And there were licensing agreements. Complex ones. We discussed them early on. He needed specific legal structures to protect his innovation, to license it to the operating company he was building. It was a standard maneuver, the lawyer confirmed, separating the valuable IP from the operational entity for liability and strategic reasons. Who owns the entity that holds the licensing rights? The lawyer asked. My mind went blank. I didn't know. We had set it up years ago under his guidance. It was just another piece of the corporate puzzle. The lawyer looked up something on his computer. His brow furrowed. According to the records here, the entity holding the licensing rights is registered under your name. My name. The world tilted. I stared at him.
Mean?
Yes, he confirmed, tapping the screen. Established 12 years ago.
Sole proprietor.
12 years ago. Before the business exploded. When it was just a kernel of an idea, a garage operation. We had incorporated the main business entity, but he had also created this separate, smaller entity to hold the intellectual property, the patent. He said it was smarter for taxes for future investment. I hadn't paid much attention. Signed the papers he put in front of me. Trusted him completely. I barely remembered it. This changed everything. The documents I found weren't just about restructuring. They were about transferring ownership of the operating company. But the operating company was useless without the license to use the core technology. And I owned that license. The dread didn't dissipate. It sharpened into a cold, calculating focus. This wasn't just an affair. This was a hostile takeover of our shared life, our financial future, planned in secret, executed with ruthless efficiency. And the recipient wasn't just a fleeting fling. It was her.
Sarah.
He was giving her the business. Our business. The pain twisted into something hard and dangerous. They weren't just betraying me emotionally. They were trying to erase me financially, to build their future on the ruins of mine. The thought of them succeeding, of her stepping into my place, running the company we built, benefiting from the years of my quiet sacrifice and his initial genius, was unbearable. It fueled a fire, cold and steady, in my gut. I didn't confront him about the affair. I didn't confront him about the documents. I played the part of the unsuspecting wife. It was agony. Every smile felt like a lie. Every shared meal choked me. I watched him, saw the subtle signs of guilt or impatience, the relief when I didn't ask questions. And I watched her from a distance. Saw her arriving at the office earlier, leaving later. Saw them together at industry events, cloaked in professional discretion that felt like a mockery. While they were busy plotting my obsolescence, I was working. The lawyer helped me understand the full implications of my ownership of the licensing entity. It wasn't just a technicality. It was the linchpin. The operating company's entire existence depended on that license. If I revoked it, the business, overnight, would become an empty shell. Unable to sell its product, unable to function. Worthless. We quietly, meticulously prepared. We reviewed the original licensing agreement. It was ironclad. Annual terms, renewable only with my explicit consent. It had clauses about change of ownership of the operating company, requiring my written approval, with broad discretion for me to withhold it. He had written it himself, years ago, to protect his IP. He had inadvertently built my castle, brick by brick, and handed me the key. My lawyer advised caution. You could just walk away. Divorce him. Take your half of the marital assets. With this licensing entity, you have significant leverage in negotiations, but that wasn't enough. Not after seeing the lengths they had gone to betray me, the cold calculation of their plan. Just taking my share felt like retreating. It felt like letting them have their poison victory. I wanted more than my share. I wanted justice. I wanted them to understand the magnitude of what they had tried to do and to face the consequences. I wanted them to be blindsided, utterly and completely, the way I had been. I needed to know their plan fully. How would they execute the transfer? When? Would they try to deceive me into signing something else? I remained vigilant, sifting through his discarded papers, monitoring his moods, listening, observing. The tension in the house was a physical weight, pressing down on me. I slept little, my mind racing, rehearsing scenarios. The calmness I projected was a fragile mask over a churning sea of rage and fear. Then came the notification. An official-looking email forwarded to our shared household account, likely sent by mistake or overlooked in their haste. It was from a corporate lawyer's office. Subject: regarding the transfer of ownership, it detailed a meeting date, time, and location, a neutral conference room downtown. It listed attendees: my husband, Sarah, a notary, and a legal representative for the acquiring party, which was, thinly veiled, a holding company controlled by Sarah. The date was set for later that week. They were doing it. They weren't asking for my consent on the license. They were just transferring the operating company, assuming I wouldn't notice, or that my ownership of the licensing rights was irrelevant, or that they could deal with it later. They were walking into a trap they didn't even see. My heart pounded. This was it. The day they planned to finalize their theft. My lawyer agreed. This was the moment. We needed to be there. Not invited.
Just there.
The day arrived, heavy and gray. I dressed with deliberate care, choosing an outfit that was professional, unassuming, calm. I felt like a spy in my own life. The drive downtown was a blur. My hands were steady on the wheel, but inside, I was a knot of vibrating nerves. This was the end of one life, the beginning of something unknown. We walked into the building lobby, my lawyer a silent, reassuring presence beside me. We took the elevator up, the music a surreal soundtrack to my internal war. Found the conference room number. The door was slightly ajar. I could hear voices inside. His voice. Hers. Calm, professional, discussing clauses, signatures. My lawyer nodded at me, a silent signal. I pushed the door open. The conversation stopped dead. Heads turned. My husband's eyes widened in shock. Sarah's jaw dropped. The notary looked confused. The other lawyer looked annoyed. Silence.
Thick and heavy.
My husband found his voice first. What are you doing here? It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. I walked into the room, my gaze steady, meeting his eyes, then hers. I didn't raise my voice. I believe I should be here, given what you're doing. Sarah recovered her composure, a sneer touching her lips. This is a private business matter. It involves my husband's business, I replied, moving towards the long conference table. Which makes it my business. My husband stood up, agitated. We can discuss this later. This is not the time. No, I said softly, pulling out a chair. This is exactly the time. You see, I got a copy of your little agenda. I gestured to the table where their documents were spread out. Transfer of ownership. He paled further. Sarah shifted uncomfortably. The lawyers looked at each other. And it got me thinking. I continued, my voice still calm, conversational, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. About the business. About its assets. Its value. My husband recovered some of his bluster. Yes, well, that's what we're finalizing. Right, I said, my eyes fixed on Sarah. You're acquiring the operating company. Very good. A shell corporation, essentially. Sarah scoffed. It's the company. It has the clients, the infrastructure. But it doesn't have the license. I finished for her, still in that quiet tone. The air in the room grew colder. My husband frowned, confused. The license? What are you talking about? The license to use the core technology, I explained patiently, as if to a child. The patented software. The one that makes the business viable. The one developed years ago. Sarah's eyes narrowed. That's part of the company's assets. I shook my head slowly.
No.
It's not. Not since 12 years ago. Remember? When the intellectual property was separated into a distinct entity. For tax purposes. For protection, my eyes flicked to my husband.
He was starting to sweat.
He knew. Or was starting to remember. I reached for the Manila folder. That entity, I said, pulling out a single document, is called Innovate IP Holdings LLC. I slid the document across the table. It was the registration certificate, listing me as the sole proprietor. And I own it. I let that sink in. The silence stretched, thick with disbelief. Sarah picked up the paper, scanned it, her face turning ashen. My husband stared at it, then at me, his face a mask of dawning horror. The notary and the other lawyer leaned forward, examining the document, then looking at each other, their professional detachment cracking. Innovate IP Holdings LLC holds the exclusive licensing rights to the core software, I continued, my voice gaining a quiet strength. The operating company, the one you're trying to acquire, I gestured to Sarah, operates under a license agreement with Innovate IP Holdings LLC. An annual agreement. Sarah looked up, her voice shaky. An annual agreement? Yes, I confirmed. Renewable only with my written consent. My husband finally spoke, his voice hoarse. That's not right. That license was evergreen. Part of the company. No. I corrected him gently, but with the force of a movable fact. You drafted the original agreement yourself. You made sure it was an annual term, giving you control back then. You just forgot who you put in charge of the licensing entity. You put my name on it, dear. The words hung in the air. He stumbled back, grabbing the edge of the table for support. Sarah slammed the paper down. You can't do this. The company is worth millions. Without the license to use the technology, I said, meeting her furious gaze, the company is worth precisely zero. It cannot sell its product. It has no assets of value beyond desks and computers. All its contracts, its clients, are based on the assumption it can legally use that software. I leaned forward slightly. Which it cannot. Without my permission. I paused, letting the full weight of it crush them. And I'm not giving permission.
Not to you, Sarah.
Not to this shell company you've created. Not under any circumstances. My husband made a strangled sound. He looked at me, his eyes pleading, disbelieving. You knew. I knew you were planning something, I said, my voice finally breaking free of its artificial calm, though still quiet, deadly. I knew you were betraying me, but I didn't realize until recently just how far you were willing to go.
To steal what was ours.
To build your future on a lie. Sarah stood up, her face contorted with rage. You scheming bitch. My lawyer stepped forward. Ms. Miller, I advise you to refrain from making threats. My client is well within her legal rights. Legal rights? Sarah shrieked. She's destroying everything. You are destroying everything first, I said, my voice flat. You just didn't realize I held the demolition codes. My husband suddenly gasped, a sharp, rattling sound. He clutched his chest, his face contorting in pain, going from ashen to a horrifying shade of purple. He stumbled back further, the chair scraping loudly as it fell behind him. He collapsed onto the floor with a thud, his eyes wide and fixed, his breathing shallow and ragged. Panic erupted. Sarah screamed, rushing to his side. The notary fumbled for his phone, dialing 911. The other lawyer looked utterly bewildered, caught in a legal and medical emergency he hadn't signed up for. I remained seated, watching the chaos, the carefully constructed composure I'd maintained for weeks finally cracking. A wave of nausea washed over me, not from panic, but from a sickening mix of triumph and pity. He had tried to take everything, and in the moment of his perceived victory, it had all come crashing down literally. The paramedics arrived, a blur of motion and urgent voices. They worked on him, while Sarah hovered, crying, shouting my name, accusing me of doing this to him. I sat there, numb, watching the life drain from the room, replaced by the sterile efficiency of medical intervention. He was loaded onto a stretcher, carried out, sirens wailing faintly in the distance. Sarah went with him. The conference room was left in disarray. Papers scattered, chairs askew. The notary and the lawyer from the other side gathered their things quickly, avoiding my gaze. My lawyer stayed with me, silent, placing a hand on my arm. "What happens now?" he asked softly. What happened now was that I owned the heart of the business. The operating company was theirs legally on paper, but it was a corpse, a hollow shell. Sarah had acquired nothing of value. My husband had given her a meaningless legal entity. He had tried to erase me, but instead, he had erased himself from the equation entirely and left her with a worthless piece of paper. The days that followed were a blur of legal consultations, hushed phone calls, and the grim reality of the situation. My husband survived, but the collapse was serious. It left him incapacitated, unable to manage anything. Sarah was left holding the bag, the legally owned but functionally dead company, facing down creditors, employees, and the stark fact that she had been utterly, spectacularly played, not by me directly in a manipulative scheme, but by her own greed and my husband's reckless deceit running headfirst into a legal structure he had created years ago. She tried to fight, threatened lawsuits, claimed I had acted maliciously. But my lawyer was ready. We had the documents. We had the original licensing agreement, signed and dated, predating their affair, predating the transfer plan. There was no malice required on my part. I simply chose not to renew a standard annual license. My reasons were irrelevant. It was my right. The business, the operating company, folded. Quickly and messily. Employees lost their jobs.
Clients scrambled.
Sarah was left with nothing but debt and the bitter taste of defeat. She vanished from the scene, a ghost in the story she thought she was writing. And me? I was left with the licensing entity, with the core technology, the valuable part. It wasn't the operating business, with its clients and employees. It was just the potential, the brain without the body. The victory felt hollow, cold. I had won. I had protected myself. I had delivered justice, swift and absolute. But the cost. The marriage was destroyed, irrevocably. The man I loved, or thought I loved, was gone, replaced by a stranger who had plotted against me. The years we had built, the shared dreams, were ashes. But in the quiet after the storm, a different feeling began to stir. Not happiness, not exactly, but a fierce sense of self-reliance. I had been brought to my knees, stripped bare by betrayal, and I had found the strength, the intelligence, the cold resolve to fight back. I hadn't needed saving. I had saved myself. The licensing entity sat there, a dormant power. I had the technology. I had the right to use it or license it to someone else. It was mine, built on his initial genius, yes, but preserved and now controlled by my unexpected ownership. A strange, complicated inheritance. I decided to build again. Not the same business, not with the same people, but something new, leveraging the technology one now controlled. It wouldn't be easy. It meant starting over, stepping out of the quiet background role I had always played. It meant risk, but it was mine.
Holly, unequivocali mine.
A future forged in the fire of betrayal, built on the ruins of a life I thought I had, powered by a strength I didn't know I possessed. It's a strange kind of win. You defend your castle, not with swords, but with paperwork and the bitter knowledge that the person attacking you lived inside with you. The attackers crumble, leaving you standing in the rubble. But you are standing, and you have the blueprint for something new in your hand. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.